All right, subscribers, welcome back to another episode of Science with Surback. Today, what we're going to be talking about is section 1.4, which deals with scientific research. Now, before I get into the details of the notes, there's a couple of objectives that I want you to be able to meet by the end of this video. So, objective number 1 is to compare and contrast pure research, applied research, and technology. And objective number 2 is to apply knowledge of laboratory safety. So we start out here with this concept of pure research. Now, pure research is defined as research that seeks to gain knowledge for the sake of knowledge itself. Now, pure research is normally motivated by curiosity. And so the best way to identify some of these things associated with pure research is through some examples. So one example we discussed earlier is Molina and Rowland's research on their chlorofluorocarbons, or those CFCs, and the interaction with ozone. And another good example of pure research would be finding the beginnings of the universe. Now, the other type of research that we can deal with is called applied research. So, applied research is defined as research undertaken to solve a specific problem. Now, it's important to note that pure research can become applied research. Now, again, the best way to understand applied research is through examples. So one example is Watson and Crick's discovery of the structure of DNA. Watson and Crick were designing experiments specifically to be able to find that structure of the DNA. Now, another example is finding a replacement chemical for those CFCs, or chlorofluorocarbons, that are now banned. Now, what we also need to talk about here as we talk about the different types of research are things we know as chance discoveries. Now, chance discoveries are conclusions reached in research that is far different from what is expected. And a good example of this was the development of nylon. Now, nylon was discovered when a hot glass rod was dipped in a mixture of solutions, and it unexpectedly pulled out those long fibers we eventually called nylon. Now, this discovery of nylon was made by Wallace Crothers in 1928 while working for E.I. DuPont, De Numerous and Company. Now, this DuPont may sound familiar because it is a common chemical manufacturer company who makes a lot of products that we use on an everyday basis. One example of it is they make a lot of the paper, the film that covers your walls and your siding. But again, this was a chance discovery because they did something in the lab and they got these unexpected results. Now, as we turn our attention to the lab, and that's where most of our learning is done in this type of classroom, we need to take into consideration some things that we need to know before we get into the lab. So number 1 here, when we get to learning in the lab, we are going to learn about facts about matter through experiments. Now, you will do the following during experiments. Number 1, you will form and test hypothesis. Number 2, gather and analyze data. And number 3, you will draw conclusions. Now, as we talk about learning in the lab, what is a very important concept is the safety that needs to be conducted and followed by every member in the lab. So, number one, you are responsible for your safety and the safety of people working nearby. Misbehavior in the lab will not be tolerated. The rules on the following page must be memorized and followed at all times. Now again, to help review these rules, I'm not going to read all of them, but I am going to expect you to read this table over. The biggest thing that is the largest offense is not wearing your safety goggles. Anytime we are going to conduct a lab experiment in the chemistry lab, we need to wear safety goggles. Other rules will be emphasized during each of our labs, but these are the guidelines I expect you to follow, and these are the guidelines I expect you to use for safe behavior in the lab. As mentioned before, non-safe lab activities will not be tolerated, and you will be dismissed from a lab if you fail to follow any safety guideline. Okay, so now let's end this chapter here with why chemistry is beneficial. So, number one, we can have the purpose of research in the chemistry explained. So number one, applied research addresses a specific problem. Because of this, it is easier to see the immediate benefits of this applied research. Now, pure research recalls research that has already been conducted. And pure research is going to help solve sudden, unexpected events that occur in the world. And the best way to see this is through some examples. One example here is the ozone hole in the atmosphere. Without that work and pure research, we may have never noticed the problem, and without that research, we wouldn't have developed solutions to get rid of that problem or solve that problem. Another example here of pure research was the AIDS epidemic. The first line of defense was to look at pure research. So what we can also discuss is technology. Now, technology is defined as the practical use of scientific information. Now, technology is the result of both pure and applied research. All right, so that is our last part of business here on section 1.4 and actually chapter 1 as a total. So I hope you have enjoyed this episode and learned a little bit more about the research involved in chemistry and science. And as always, if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe.